So my name is Pantelis. You can call me PK for short. That's easier. Basically, everyone in our office does. So no pain, no gain there. So I'm the lead product designer at Hopper, and for those of you who haven't heard of us, I'll go into a little more depth on that later. But we are a travel app, mobile only, and we spend a lot of time in tech talking about. Oops. Hello. My bad. We spend a lot of time in tech talking about how to inform ourselves with data, right? That's great advice. We should definitely continue doing that. But the thing I want to talk about tonight is how informing our users with data can create some really, really surprising design opportunities.
Sorry, that was crazy.
Cool. Yeah, with that said, I think this really represents a really untapped pool of design ideas and product ideas. And the reason I know this is because basically Hopper wouldn't exist if that wasn't true. So like I said, some context here. Hopper is a travel app for iOS and Android, and we are mobile only. And we basically are aimed at using data to help our users understand when they should buy their tickets or when they should actually fly somewhere to save money. That's the basic premise. But underneath that, we're basically a flight searching and booking tool, right? That's pretty straightforward. A lot of tools are doing that. But it's really the data that we give to our users, not just that we use to build the app, that makes all the difference. So let me try and explain what I mean by that. So this is basically every flight search app out there, right? Yeah, 6 inputs here. You press the search button and you get your results, right? Pretty straightforward. And that is kind of a carryover from the web days, right? It's basically Google with a lot more fields. So we have decided, among other things, to jam 2 screens right inside of that. Now, usually, as a design decision, that's not necessarily a good place to start. It adds friction, right, in theory. But this is where we bring data to the equation, and this is where we help our users understand what they're going to see next. For us, that's flight inventory, but that could be other things. So to kind of make sense of that, the first thing we do, that first screen we added there, informs our users when they should actually fly somewhere. So one of the benefits we get from doing this is we pull that input out of the search screen, right? So this screen is much simpler now. If we infer your origin correctly, it also is only a single input. And what that does is it reduces friction, yes, in that first step, but it also reduces the amount of steps it takes to give something back to our users. And that's really what we're after, right? Users don't really like to have apps for the sake of inputting fields, right? They do it for something. They do it for something that they want to get in return. So we're able to do that with data, and we're able to do it in a single field for most cases. So in that case, it's data on when you should actually go to your destination. Most leisure travelers have some flexibility. That's why plus or minus 3 days exists in other apps. But you can often save a lot more money by maybe switching it up a week or a month. And if you're truly flexible and you know that earlier in your travel planning process, you can save quite a bit. So we're able to show you that right away. The screen right after that then actually informs our users then on when they should buy their tickets. So we can say things like, hey, until this date, your price will vary and it will drop a certain amount. And after that, it's probably going to rise. So again, able to inform you after that on what you can expect with your purchase. But we kind of take that a step further, and on that same screen right above that, we anchor it to this message, wait or buy. And that, in this case, can tell you something like, hey, you should save about this much if you wait and watch this trend, right? So we're able to really inform you in an actionable way. And if you press that big blue button that is right here, and we tell you to do that up there, if we say wait, we will send you data in the form of push notifications on what to expect as you're waiting. So in this case, we're telling you to actually buy, which is nice because the price is low and that's cool. But we'll even inform you up until that point when, say, the price is fluctuating and you get a little nervous because you think it's going to continue going up, or you think it's gone down, so it's a good price and it's better than what you saw at the beginning, so you should buy it. And we'll tell you, hey, sit tight, the price is still going to go down, so you can wait. So Again, bringing data to help the user understand what they're looking at, the flights that they're going to purchase later. And for anyone who's ever received a retail push notification like this, I think you can see the value, right, that data brings to that equation. And for us, we have created an incredible amount of trust in our push notifications, which is something a lot of companies fail to do in this case, to the point that we have about 80%, I think, give or take, of our bookings coming from push notifications that say you should buy. So that's pretty unheard of in the world of mobile apps. So for our users, it's simply saving money. That's pretty great, right? But what we've done through that process is we're able to inform you in a way that has you, not us, you make better decisions about when you should purchase. And that is the thing we're able to give back, right? Is the feeling of confidence that you are making better decisions, right? And that's basically what data does for us, right, as a team or a designer. So being able to give that onto our users is really nice. But ultimately, you can't just give them all the data you have, and all the, in our case, data it takes to give you something. So this is really interesting as a data scientist. The colors mean things, the dots mean things, the lines mean things. I've worked at Hopper for almost 3 years. I still don't totally understand what's going on here, but it is very useful. You just jam that in a phone, right? You're in trouble. So there's a couple things that I've kind of gone after as basic principles for what you need to do to make it useful for your users. So the first one here is just be selective, right? That kind of fits with what I was saying a second ago, but don't give them everything, but really try and understand it with either you or your team or whatever it takes to figure out what are the real opportunities, what are the most interesting bits of information, with the aim of yes, simplifying it, but also being impactful with what you're giving, right? Data for the sake of data doesn't necessarily help your users either, just like we were talking about earlier, it doesn't really do that for us either. So in the second case, though, it's also really important to make it actionable. Now there's some instances you can get by with just having interesting information to share, but in an ideal world, your app or your product exists for a reason, and it's to do something. So tying it to that ultimately helps the user when it matters, right, when they need to act. So to use the example I kind of showed up there earlier, we have this big chart, right, full of a bunch of interesting bits of information, but we've anchored it to a binary decision, wait or book. And both of those are very actionable in and of themselves, right, just as words. But we also have linked them to actions in the app. So if we say book, there's a clear action. If we say wait, we tell you how much you can save, and we actually link it, right, to this word you should watch, which is that big blue button up there. So you know what to do next in both of those cases. So there's a bunch of good examples of this on the web. This is Google Maps, you've probably seen this. They satisfy the first principle pretty well, right? It's simple, there's an icon, there's a bit of data right next to it, but it's concise. And the second one, it's actionable, right? If I know walking is going to take me 58 minutes, I might take an Uber, right? This is UK-based City Mapper. They do something similar. I like theirs a little better personally because it's a grid. I can compare all of them without swiping horizontally, but again, same principle. Medium actually does an interesting job of this that I hadn't seen in reading apps before, but they tell you the expected reading time. Now, obviously, this isn't wholly accurate, right? They don't know how fast I read. I'm probably a little slower, but it is simple and it's actionable. I can know if I'm on the bus and I have a 10-minute bus ride that I could probably get through most of that 5-minute read. And this is Twitter. Surprisingly, I guess the timestamp works similarly. Insofar as they often have kind of urgent information, maybe there's a crisis, an event in your city, you can actually map that to the urgency of that event. It's a simple thing, 44 minutes, but I know it's not as relevant as something that happened a second ago if it's timely. So these are all really interesting, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch more, and I'd love to see you tweet me some if you know some that I've missed. But they're also kind of passive, I guess, and the really interesting opportunities come from the form of building your features or your products around giving this data to your users, not just building a normal feature and slapping data on it. And we kind of learned this the hard way when we were building a filters feature in our app. So this is, I think, Skyscanner, Hitmonk, and Kayak. And this is their filter, right? Flights, yes, but if you used any other app that has a search result, it looks pretty similar to this. And it's pretty basic, it's pretty cookie cutter, right? You have a list of search results, there's a button on that, you press that, and you get a list of things then that you can remove from those results, right? Pretty simple. Excuse me. So we thought that was going to be an easy thing to do, and we were getting a bunch of requests from this from our users. Here's a couple of examples we were getting from Twitter, but there's a bunch of pent-up demand. So we thought something that was easy to build and that users were asking for was going to be pretty easy to execute on. And this was our #1 requested feature at the time as well. So that's basically what we did. We put a button in the places that mattered, that triggered a list, and we were pretty proud of what we did too. We simplified that list, which is kind of how we like to build, particularly because we're a mobile product. So we covered 80% of our filter requests with these few fields right there. So we were pretty happy. We were like, we did it. We nailed it. Everyone's gonna love it. Cool. Wrong. Wrong. So 2.6% just basically didn't justify any of our effort on it, right? That basically didn't happen. And we were pretty distraught about that, right? Because it feels kind of wasteful and it feels like failure a little bit. But we were also confused because it was the #1 requested feature, right? Were we misled by a bunch of Twitter users? Who knows? So one of the things I realized in hindsight is it was going back to what I was saying about being passive about it. So we actually already included data. You see this, flights are about the same price without filters. Flights are about $90 cheaper without filters. So we included it, but it was pretty far in the funnel. And you had to do something as a user before we could give it to you. In other words, you had to press the filters button, load the list, move something, like press a button or the slider, before you would get this message. So, interesting, but it was kind of buried, and you've already kind of made some decisions at that point. So, one of our product managers helped us realize the opportunity I was talking about earlier, where we could build the feature around the data. And in this case, we actually pulled it out of the filters menu. And we put it on a tile that appeared on this core screen I showed earlier. And we could say things dynamically depending on the route and where you were going, such as fly nonstop for the exact same price. If I knew I could fly nonstop for the exact same price, I would literally do it every time. In this case, it also says don't want to wait. Flights with a short layover cost an extra $91. Now maybe $91 is a lot if you're flying a $300 flight. But if you're flying internationally, and you're paying a few $1,000s, and the layovers are 12 hours in Istanbul, $91 might mean something to you, right? So that satisfies the first principle of it being simple, right? A small, digestible bit of information. But it also was actionable. We put this big button here, and when you pressed it, it automatically applied filters. So you didn't even have to load that sheet that we had before. If you wanted to, it's still up there if you see on the top right, but you didn't have to do that. So by creating a feature around that data, we actually removed friction and created something that was much easier to do and more impactful because it gave you data at the right time. And it basically 10x'd our results. It went from being completely meaningless to 23% of our users, nearly a quarter of them using this feature. And we also learned later that users who use filters converted at a higher rate. So we materially affected by doing it. So to sum it up, right? Yes, it's a really good idea to inform yourself and your team with data. Don't stop doing that. Always do that. But there's a really, really untapped opportunity to build things with data and pass that on to your users. So like I was saying earlier, be selective with it, make it actionable, otherwise it's just going to be a mess. No one's going to benefit from anything. Or worst case scenario, you just frustrate them and they have nothing to do about it, right? And that's not helpful. So yes, keep doing that, totally, but we should do a little bit more of this. Thank you. let's start over here.
So my question is, looking at all the travel industry, looking at all the travel industry right now, they're all based on web, and here you are, you're the only company that based on web applications. So my question is, how did you come to that conclusion in the beginning? Like, how did you actually decide, like, no, web, like mobile applications is good to go, not web?
That's a really, really good question. I will try to summarize it quickly because Hopper has a very interesting backstory that answers a lot of that. But ultimately, Hopper was trying to solve a web-based problem that was more travel discovery. So they were trying to do something really broad, like if I searched for wine in August, I want to go to wine tours or something, that it could surface really relevant and meaningful information based on where you were. If you were in Toronto, blah, 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 right? You would do all this stuff. And throughout that process, they were trying to do things, can't help but answer that, right, naturally. And one of those was collecting data, and one of those was collecting flight data to be able to answer, well, maybe you should go to France because it's cheaper to fly there than somewhere else. And so early on, they didn't really know that. And they basically, our chief data scientist, Patrick, who was working on all of this stuff, wrote this really obscure PDF and put it on his research blog. And it was about seasonal flight price change. And Hopper was still relatively unknown at that time. And the New York Times found that in his blog, some writer at the New York Times, and wrote about it. And they didn't write about the data as much in that article. They ended up writing about Hopper and how cool this flight piece was. And at the time, that didn't exist at all for people to use. It wasn't on our website, it wasn't in a product, people could find it yet. So all of a sudden, from being relatively unknown, there were millions of hits coming from this article to the Hopper website. So that was the point where Hopper kind of pivoted to where it's at now. That's around the time I started. And it was basically that moment, which they had gone from web for a while, that they said, we need to change our model. We need to focus on this piece of it that people are really interested in. And it just so happened that trends for travel were increasingly pushing into mobile at the time, just no one had jumped on it. So it seemed like a really good opportunity. That's a really good call by our leadership team. But it was basically that, the opportunity that there wasn't a player in there and that there was an interesting play with the data that didn't exist either.
I speak very loud. just for the video. Okay, cheers. Hey.
Hi.
I love your product. I got one at the beginning of Hopper. I absolutely love it.
Awesome. Thank you.
In so many ways, I feel like Hopper is kind of a UI solution to how to display data, and you definitely do it in numbers and like with the use of colors. But is there any other way that you display data that is like innovative to the user?
That's a great question. I think we're, on one hand, still trying to figure that out. So much of what we do when we build features, like I mentioned with filters, is agonize over that exact question. So I don't know if there's a particularly simple answer for it, right? There's visualizations, there's numbers, there's sentences, and we use a kind of messy blend of those. I think we skew right now towards words. And one benefit of that has been it's been fairly conversational. Even our push notifications, we're not just sending you a chart or a single data point. We're putting it in the context of something that's important to you. Your trip to LA, right? We know you're watching LA, you're planning on going to LA, so it's yours, it's personal. We're talking to you as maybe a friend would in that case. So it's been really, I think, valuable for us to often frame it in that way that's relatable and digestible. That's kind of that first principle of being kind of simple and selective. But I do personally sometimes wonder if we skew too much in that direction. And then one of the things we're talking a lot about now is how can we represent data more in a visual way that resonates without being too heavy, I guess, on that front. So that calendar, which you saw at one point, we found over the last maybe year building features that has become in so many ways synonymous with our brand and our product. So a new feature we just built and released called Flex Watch. You can create more flexible searches and watches with this. Starts to incorporate those kind of color-coded keys because people have come to expect it. And even our early user tests, we would show something that was maybe word-based or use some other visualization, and people were like, "Where's the green bar? Or where's the green bar?" So like they kind of associated with that. So it's become kind of a blend of those two words and trying to make it relatable. And then also kind of emphasizing this calendar, which has done a really good job for us of being simple and kind of speaks for itself, right? You don't have to use words to talk about what's happening.
This would be the last question. We're running a little late.
I've got a question in terms of how you make decisions as to what data you surface. So for example, if someone's flight could be cheaper later on, you have a choice to decide, oh, I'm going to surface this data point that they should wait. So what principles or guidelines do you work upon to figure out, should I surface this data or not? How do you make those judgment calls?
That is another very good question. Another thing I suppose we agonize over in every feature is that I don't know if there's a super simple answer to that. One of the things we definitely do try to do is make it understandable, right? And that seems straightforward, but sometimes things will be kind of cut off the list if they just aren't digestible, right? If you have to use a paragraph to try and make sense of something like that, it becomes a lot harder to resonate and be useful. So some of the internal decisions that we're making are trying to weigh those trade-offs. Like how do we do something that's impactful, but also doesn't require a whole page of sentences to make sense of it. So even that screen we showed, it's a little text dense, and we try to emphasize that word buy or wait, right? But there's a subsequent paragraph to try and put it in context, right? So it's a hard battle, and I think we often grapple with that. But yeah, it's so much of it is realizing what I was showing with that chart earlier, that at the same time you're doing a disservice by just giving data if it's too complex, or you're telling them too much, or you're giving too much context. So if it was a practical thing that I could give you, I would say that we spend a lot of time saying, okay, what are the most important points? How can we boil those down to a couple sentences? And then we talk to people. We put it in the app, we play with it ourselves, we do guerrilla testing, we just say, does this make sense? And what are you getting from this? And it's a messy process, and it's definitely not structured very well all of the time, but it usually makes it pretty clear whether we're on point with something or not. Because even, as I was saying with that notification copy, right, it's a couple lines of text. And if you take that approach of saying, we're a friend just telling you something about your trip, kind of thinking about it from that perspective, and how do I just kind of talk to this as I would to my mother or my father or a friend, kind of teases that out sometimes too. So again, sorry, I don't have a better answer. I think we're constantly grappling with that anytime we're building something, but it's a great question.
A big round of applause for Pantelis. So while I set up for our last presentation, we're going to do 3 community shoutouts, and Sarah's going to decide.